actions speak louder than words. The same is true when talking to yourself. Your brain is watching what you do every day. We're goal-directed machines. You're teaching the brain that calm, cool, and collected is a goal that you value enough that you're putting daily energy into it. So most people don't actually realize we talk to ourselves through our actions. This is why I always say the most dangerous thing in the world is if you're goal setting, put something on a goal to routinely not accomplish your goals. Why waste the energy? If you've got a fixed mindset, the brain won't bother expending the energy to learn from mistakes. Over time, you start to recognize your rhythms. That's consistent across, I've seen this again and again, so you stop making those mistakes. When crisis situations arise, flow is what the body switches into to solve the problem if everything's working correctly.
What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before? What does it take for individuals, organizations, for even institutions to achieve paradigm shifting? Nothing is ever the same again. Breakthroughs.
Our mission is to decode the neurobiology of flow and cognitive peak performance. Access the minds of maverick scientists, groundbreaking innovators, and world-leading experts to understand what it takes to achieve ultimate human performance, so you can feel your best, perform your best, and accomplish your boldest goals. I'm your host, Rian Doris, and together with best-selling author Stephen Kotler, I present to you Flow Research Collective Radio.
Stephen, thanks so much for joining me today on the Mark Divine Show. It's so good to see you again.
It's great to see you, Mark, as always.
And I had so much fun doing your crowdcast a couple weeks ago. That was just a blast. What a great idea.
Yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on that. Stephen, we've talked before about your work with Flow Research Collective and prior to that, the Flow Genome Project. And I know that you probably get this question a lot, but I'm going to throw it out there. How do you define flow?
So what's funny about this is I have never, to the best of my knowledge, I have never personally had a definition of flow.
Is that right?
Science has a definition of flow that I have been trying to be a proponent of, but nobody seems to hear that part. They do hear the personal part. So it's an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. And it refers to any of those moments of total absorption and rapt attention when you get so focused on what you're doing on the task at hand, everything else just starts to melt away. Action awareness are going to merge, your sense of self, self-consciousness, the voice in your head, most importantly, is going to get really quiet, going to diminish. Time will pass strangely. Usually you just get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by in 5 minutes. Occasionally you can get that freeze frame effect. Maybe any of you who's been in a car crash, shows up in combat, action sports, things like that. And throughout all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. And it's in terms of what's optimized in flow, it's a fairly long list. We can go into it if we want to, but it's like a bunch of stuff on the physical side, a ton of stuff on the mental side, and all of it is significantly higher than baseline.
Is it something that one does, or is it something that happens as a result of certain circumstances?
Yes. Yes.
Both and.
Both and. So the work that I've been involved in, which is looking at trying to decode the neurobiology of flow. So what's going on in the brain and the body moving into this state. It's a full body experience, right? We see regular changes in brain activity and respiration, in heart rate, in facial muscle signatures, things like that. So we, from a neurobiological standpoint, we've got it fairly decoded. And what we've learned is that flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. Mm-hmm. And there are 26 that have been discovered. There's probably way more. That's just what we've discovered. All of them seem to work the same way. If you cut past the whiz bang, flow can only show up when all of our attention is focused right here, right now. So that's what all the triggers do. They work on the attention system and they drive attention into the present moment. And they keep you focused on sort of a limited field of attention. And some of those triggers, for example, are internal. pattern recognition, when we link two ideas together, right, in a new way. So this can be when you've done a crossword puzzle, you get an answer right, you feel that little rush of pleasure. That's dopamine. That's
Right.
an internally generated focusing mechanism based on linking two ideas together. So I just wrote a book where there's a bunch of skiing in it. When skiers look at like a snowbank and go, oh, I can use that snowbank to throw my body sideways and grind across it, or whatever, skateboard trick too. That's interpretation of terrain. That's pattern recognition. So these are internally generated ways to do that. If I put myself into a situation of high risk, risk is another flow trigger. So is that internal? Is it external? They're on the very sort of fine line. And even with risk, you know as well as I do, there's actual risk, which is negligible on performance, versus perceived risk, which is what really impacts performance the most. And that's in the eyes of the beholder, for sure. So I don't, when I say yes, I think of things in terms of embodied cognition. Embodied cognition says like we're brains, we're bodies, and we're built in the environment, and the environment's built in culture, and all of that is the impact we're looking at. And you, I would guess, would probably look at me and go, Stephen, what about the whole spiritual side of it? And I would once again say, yes, that's if that's true too, that's also going to impact it on top of culture, right? And it'll come in that way. Open question from a scientific point of view, but like that's how I think of it. So I don't, that internal external line, I'm not quite sure of. But what I will say is this: flow is built into all mammals, most or all humans, and most mammals. Most mammals can drop into flow, especially all the group mammals. So like if you've ever, there's horse and rider flow. Dogs get into flow all the time with humans. Cross species flow is what that's called. So it's old. It exists in all mammals. This is how we do peak performance, right? When crisis situations arise, flow is what the body switches into to solve the problem if everything's working correctly.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, this comment about animals. I mean, how do we know that animals aren't just always in a state of flow?
Okay, so interesting question. This is
because to me, flow is
the godfather of
basically
flow psychology is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and this is actually how we met years and years ago. Because I was always working on the neurobiology of flow, we didn't cross paths that much. I was already 10, 12 years into my flow research, and it started when I was over these questions of, do animals get into flow or not? Do they live in perpetual flow states? What does that mean? And I actually reached out to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi on that question about, do dogs get into flow? What are you looking at? I think there's open questions because it depends on, so we do work with rescue animals, right? And we do really like.
Thank you for doing that, by the way. That's really cool. I said, thank you for doing that. It's important work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, to me, like I get so much out of it.
Yeah, I bet.
It's ridiculous for me to sort of like accept any praise. It's so rewarding, and I like it so much. And I feel like I get so much out of it. But I will pass it along to my wife, who does a lot more of the hard work. Maybe have to get that one. But what I will tell you is this: I started getting into flow states with my dogs while running in this kind of pack hunting. And what I started to notice is there was a way we would run together that would get us into flow. They would start to try to egg me into the state. And you could tell they were altered. Like you could look at pupil dilation changes in flow, same thing in dogs. So you could tell they were altered. And I started to notice, wow, they seem to be like pushing me towards this thing. Like it seems to be as addictive to them as it is to humans, which seems to suggest they don't constantly live in flow. Neurobiologically, we know you can't live in flow. Humans can't live in flow. It's a 4-stage cycle. Is it totally different in other mammals? Nobody's looked, right? And I don't even know how we would look at this point. So those are questions. But what I'm basing it on is two things. One, I think animals have much greater long-term memory capacity than most people give them credit for. Like they have a past, a present, and a future. And we've seen this on lots of different levels of research. And it seems like they love flow as much as humans. And and they will try to, egg other people into flow and things like that. So I think there's some behavioral stuff that I think points towards it. But how do you know?
Yes. You'd have to become an animal.
Yeah, you'd have to become an animal.
Yeah. I find it fascinating because, you just made a comment, which, I don't know. I guess I would challenge, but that humans can't live in perpetual flow because the experience of a master, for instance, a martial arts grandmaster, Zen master, right, who's attained, the state that the Eastern traditions would call enlightenment, is living in
So
perpetual flow. And also
let me.
there's changes in the physiology that happen dramatically
Oh
when
yeah, and
when that shift occurs, which allows for much more energy to be, I guess, housed or flow through the body, that Kundalini energy they talk about. And the experience is in a perpetual now state, which is experienced all those things that you talked about as
yeah.
symptoms
So
of flow are present.
there's a bunch of research on this, and there's a bunch of translations. So what's interesting is, for example, if you go into Tibetan Buddhism, we'll go to Zen in a second, but you go
Mhm.
into Tibetan Buddhism, they have a direct translation of the word flow. There's a
Do they?
word that means flow,
Yeah.
and it is different from what they mean by enlightenment. In Zen, to go into that tradition, Satori appears to be flow, but Satori is a brief experience of enlightenment. Um, and it seems like enlightenment, and there are a bunch of people, including my mentor, Dr. Andrew Newberg, who've worked a lot on what's the neurobiology of enlightenment. Is there something going on? But when I say we can't live in flow, one of the things that happens in flow is there's a peak concentration of dopamine and possibly of norepinephrine at the front end, but definitely of dopamine.
Yeah.
Norepinephrine and dopamine in peak concentrations have a 20-minute shelf life in the brain.
Right.
That's how long they do their work, and then they fade away. So what we seem to be meaning by sort of this permanent enlightenment seems to involve changes in a part of the brain called the temporal parietal junction. Those get the TPJ gets very active in flow. It's the reason empathy expands in flow, and wisdom. That's the part of the brain that does perspective taking, when you
Right.
see things from other perspectives. So it does seem like there are permanent changes in brain function in enlightenment, like it's a real thing. It doesn't seem to be permanent flow. And I think one of the reasons is enlightenment is a not too high, not too low, very much in the middle, and flow is a big spike. I think the attitude, sort of the detached nowness that you get in flow stays in enlightenment. But I think some of the peak activities go. One of the questions would be, do we see like the same spike in creativity? Some of the stuff we can measure in flow, right? Creativity or fast twitch muscle response. If we were to, examine people who are enlightened, quote unquote, will we see those things all the time? Those would be the questions I'd want to answer. But it does seem like enlightenment is a slightly different thing from flow. And
Yeah.
certainly the neurochemical portion of the experience, just based on how those things work in the body, that's definitely different.
Yeah. So we're really talking about a psychophysiological temporary experience that's triggered.
It's a state, yeah, not a stage. And that's one of the differences with enlightenment. Enlightenment's a stage,
That's
right? It's a permanent shift.
Yeah. And I think that, because, I've often conflated this type of flow we're talking about with like the optimal experience of flowing in life. Like when everything is just, I'm not on a ski hill navigating terrain in a state of rapture where time is slowing down, but my life is just in sync. And because I'm aligned with my vision for the future, everything seems to be, synchronicities happening, everything's lining up. And I call that flow, but it's like life flow.
Yeah. So Mark,
and then there's times where everything seems to come.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. That's in my opinion, you're describing a very real phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience. Everybody I know has had that experience as well.
Right.
And what I always say when I talk about flow, I'm like, look, I can talk about the science till tomorrow morning, but I'm only going to cover about 90% of what happens in flow states. And there's this 10%, one of which is the synchronicities with life, over a longer scale, or what do we mean by luck, right? So there's this, is flow over time synonymous with luck, right? Like those are questions these are real questions.
They're philosophers' questions though.
Yeah. But I mean, I just don't think they're interesting, and I love them, and it's the cutting edge of flow research, and trying to answer some of those questions is really neat and really drives me forward, but I don't think we have any of the answers.
No.
And also, I'm somebody who, like, I'm comfortable saying, hey, we don't know, nor may we ever know.
Right.
And like the uncertainty doesn't bother me. I'm good. Like, I like it. That means I have a job and I get curiosity and I get, right.
There's
like,
more books
that's
to
phenomenal.
write. There's more
Like,
books to write. That's
It's
awesome.
great.
Like you haven't written enough already. When's that going to come to a halt?
Well, Mark, you got to remember, you think I'm writing for anything other than to preserve my mental health. Like, I'm writing first and foremost because this is like, this is some kind of therapy to me.
Right. I get
And
that.
I'm better in the world when I'm writing.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, I get that. That's your creative outlet. I love that.
yeah, I mean, how the PR that goes along, those are the questions that we could be asking, right? Because I don't know on those
Right.
about questions like that. But the writing, I mean, it's what I do for me, and I love it.
Writing it can be both painful and joyful at the same time, which is really interesting, right? How something can be both painful and joyful.
It was so funny. I was talking to my wife this morning because I went skiing yesterday, and she automatically assumes, because skiing is my favorite thing to do on earth,
Right.
that like I had an amazing time. And I said to her, Joy, you got to understand, skiing, like writing, like my relationship with you, these are all marriages. They're lifelong things. There are good days. There are bad days.
Right.
There are days where you go do the thing that you love the most in the world and it just punches you in the mouth 60
Right.
times. Like, that's what it is. Like,
So
you
true.
can't, just because it's my favorite thing in the world, you know what I mean? So I always, and I think that's the same with everybody. I distrust people who are like, oh my God, this is the thing I do. And like the thing that I do that I love the most also means that I'm being vulnerable to the fact that it can break my heart faster than almost anything else.
I love it. Well, and that's like people get happiness so wrong. They think happiness is a perpetual state of pleasure.
Yes.
And it's not, right? It's engagement with something at a level where you are content in spite of the highs and the lows. Right.
I think that's totally true. The other thing that's interesting is people actually, and this is, so people think the scale goes from pain to pleasure, that we're
Right.
on, like, there's this pain to pleasure scale, and that's how we actually work. But it's not true. And you have to if you look at the data, extreme pain is the worst that we feel on earth, but the best we feel is always group flow.
Mhm.
And that's what people rate as, and the thing, group flow or flow, a great deal of the time when you're in flow or group flow, you're uncomfortable.
Yeah,
You're,
there's
like, think
experiencing
about
discomfort,
athletes
right?
in flow,
And a
like,
little
you're
bit of fear.
physically in pain, right?
Right.
The flow allows you to forget the fact that you're in pain, but like, it's not exactly pleasure. And so the scale, I believe, and I've been trying to do more research on this, and I haven't really written much about it, but I've talked about it. So I think it's from the thing that you get in group flow, and flow is, I say it gives you 360-degree creativity, meaning you're performing at your best. So any direction you go in, you're going to be your best at, right? So it's the most fluid you can be. With a group in flow, it's even bigger because you've got, everybody can go in different directions together. So you've got a lot of options. I think it's between no choice, which is what's so rough about extreme pain. All you can do is focus on the pain. There's no
Right.
room for anything else, to group flow, which is maximum choice. I think it's no choice to maximum choice that is actually what we call pleasure pain, because pleasure pain doesn't govern human behavior, as you just pointed out, the way we think it does. It doesn't actually add up into what we see in the world and what we experience as performers.
This is true. And this is what training, or repetition and training and realism and training, and like your training for park skiing, what it does is it narrows the gap between the pleasure and pain, through that repetition of training and learning new skills and constantly, facing the unknown, which you could say is like the fear factor. What is unknown is really what is, creates the sense of fear. So you eliminate the fear. We talked about this on your podcast, by moving closer to that. And so what you end up doing is you have a much narrower band of range or band between pain and pleasure, right? And so you can bounce between them really quite rapidly.
Well, it's also,
that's flow.
I think about it on this ski hill. So we've got a ton of snow in Tahoe, which means that lines that are normally incredibly narrow and skinny and steep are now a little less steep and a little less narrow, right? In some places they're totally filled in, but it's great training. So what I keep doing is I keep putting myself back in the mountain and skiing these incredibly rowdy lines, that some lines that I could never ski, I actually couldn't ski, but I'm just trying to get the visuals down. I'm just trying to get my brain used to like what it's going to see skiing these lines. And I'm trying to ski through the moves as if there wasn't a ton of snow the way I would normally have to do. And all of it is about shrinking the unknown down so that when it really becomes ski season and some of the snow melts away and the challenge comes back, I am mentally prepared to be able to go after some of these larger challenges. But what I always think about, because it means that every day I have to go and do scary stuff. And there's always like one or two things where I really don't want to do what I'm about to do. And I feel awful on the front end, right? And yet the highlight of my day is going to be how I feel on the back end.
That's right.
And it's literally the different, it's so funny because you could ski a line and what does it take? 20 seconds, 10 seconds. And the first 5 seconds are absolute terror. And somewhere in that middle 5 seconds, terror switches into, oh my God, I've got this. And then you come out and it's the most amazing thing you've done all day. And it's so close, right? And I keep watching it happen in my brain because I keep doing this over and over. And I'm like, where's the switch? When does it flip? When does it because it happens every time, provided, I put myself in the hospital coming out the back end of it, but I've been watching it a lot on the inside because I'm fascinated by how thin that line really actually is.
Right. I love that. So I agree with you. The amount of like true pleasure, I'm not talking about hedonistic pleasure, but pleasure from an accomplishment like that is directly related to the amount of fear that you have to overcome to get to it. I love
totally
that.
agree.
It makes so much sense to me, and it's true.
I also think so. This is one of the things that I think is challenging to talk about with peak performance. Definitely applies, when it comes to like in our country, my new book in peak performance aging. This is also really relevant. I think part of what we mean by meaning, and I mean this like neurobiologically as organisms, right, is essentially the satisfaction of a job well done. Like if you do something long and hard, not something that takes a month, but something that takes years, and you start stacking year-long or multi-year accomplishments on top of one another. And this, I don't mean accomplishments in the real world. I mean, like I set myself a long challenge and I met it kind of thing. That we get a lot of what we call meaning out of that, right? Out of these long. So the reason I'm in this is a difficult discussion in peak performance is, as you know, people are so hungry for results on the front end. What is my purpose? What is my, all these things. And you're like, well, I can tell you how to turn curiosity into passion and passion into purpose, but it doesn't change the fact that the biology underneath that process is probably a year to 2 years long. That's how long it's going to take in the brain and the body for that sort of thing. It's like when people talk about, I can come back from an ACL tear in a year. And I'm like, well, you can physically, but mentally we know that your central governor is going to keep your knee from performing, full speed for at least a year and a half, no matter what you do with your physiology, because there's an internal governor saying, no, don't hurt yourself again. And it's based on sympathetic activation in the nervous system. And like, nobody's figured out how to hack that yet, right? You can hack the physiology, but the mental side of it, we haven't figured out a way to hack yet. So some of these things I find in peak performance and even peak performance aging, where you're like, I know you've got a ticking clock and it feels like it's running out. So you want these things really fast. It still doesn't change that, like some of these things, including what we mean by meaning, really take a long time to accrue and you have to earn them. I mean, it's consistency over years.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, I have a lot of clients who are like, I'm having a real challenge trying to define we call it your 3 Ps, my purpose, my passions, and my principles. And then we say, if you can define those and then figure out what the center mass is, right, then you can define your mission in life. And I say, well, that's okay, because it's always in a state of becoming, right? You're not going to be able to just grab it right now because, it's something that you're moving toward. And so get out into the arena and keep moving toward it, but create a reflective practice where now you're reflecting upon the feedback and the insights you're getting from your work. And I mean both work on your development, right, as well as work in the world. We call that self-mastery and service. And just continue to reflect through your contemplation, meditation, journaling, whatever, and asking those questions. And pretty soon it starts to be revealed to you, right? So you get the external revelation, which is coming through feedback and engagement with the world. And then you get the internal insight of how you're starting to mold yourself to the environment, right? And then what happens is suddenly after, like you said, a year or two of meaningful engagement, trying to solve this like lifetime riddle, you start to get some clarity around it.
I think one of
And
the
you call
things,
that meaning, and I agree.
yeah, no, I listening to you talk. What I'm thinking is one of the things that I find really interesting is, so you hear very often in the world, actions speak louder than words.
Right.
What people often miss is the same is true when talking to yourself.
Right.
So you're like, some of the revelations about like internal mission and things like that, your brain is watching what you do every day, right? Like one of the things you're doing when you meditate every day, right? You're not just working on like calm, cool, and collected during the meditation. You're teaching the brain that you have a goal-directed system. We're goal-directed machines. You're teaching the brain that calm, cool, and collected is a goal that you value enough that you're putting daily energy into it.
Yes.
Right. Your brain watches what you do. Right. It's very hard to lie to yourself that way. Also, so most people don't actually realize that, like, we talk to ourselves through our actions, right? Like, it's just like when we deal with the real world. Do you trust somebody's words or do you trust their actions? Well, you like their words, but it's their actions you're going to learn to trust over time. The brain is the same way, especially with ourselves. This is why I always say the most dangerous thing in the world is if you're goal setting, put something on a goal to routinely like not accomplish your goals. You're training your brain that it's just fine to not accomplish your goals.
Right.
And we're homeostatic organisms. So if you're just fine to not accomplish your goals, why waste the energy? This is the same thing we see with mindsets, right? If you've got a fixed mindset, the brain won't bother expending the energy to learn from mistakes, because why burn the energy? We got to save it, right? That's what a fixed mindset is doing. It's saying, don't spend the energy on this thing.
Right.
And it's just, I think it's interesting, some of the things that like we talk about in comments, like everybody knows actions speak louder than words, but we miss, this is very true when we talk to ourselves.
Right. You mentioned him earlier, the gentleman you connected with, and I'll butcher his name, but I call him Schitzmahel. Mihail Schitzmahel. It's not how you say it. How do you say it?
All right, Mark. First, I gotta give you a story with this.
Okay.
So I butchered his name. Everybody butchers his name.
It's impossible to pronounce.
First book I wrote about flow, which was West of Jesus, I mentioned Mihai's name. Mihai was on NPR in Cleveland. Phone rings on the station, and the caller says, "Would you please tell the moron in the chair it's Mihai Chick sent me high. Mihai Chick sent me high." Oh,
that's cool.
Which is a phonetic, if you want one, there you have it.
Well, that's a lot better than Schitzmahel.
He's what he was such a huge thinker. Most people have only read Flow or Creativity. They haven't read the full body of his work. He really was one of the smartest people of the last century. He worked on so many things, and even the work I'm doing on peak performance aging comes right out of flow work, right?
Right.
One of the reasons I got into peak performance aging is flow is the engine of adult development. It's how we gain complexity and adaptation and grow as people. It helps us grow up. It expands empathy and wisdom. It's literally an engine of maturity. And we know that, the quality of the second half of your life, big determinant is the amount of flow you get. In fact, the Flow Research Collective, we have, I don't know if we're going to change this, but right now, if you want to take our peak performance aging training, right, it's bundled with our introduction to flow training, because the flow stuff is so important
Right.
that like putting it together almost works better right now.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, that's why I brought him up, because one of his um, beautiful models was that flow can be activated when the level of challenge in whatever that you're participating in is slightly greater than the level of skill that you have. So that kind of points to what you were talking about development. So if we can actively participate in the accruing of skill, and then when we go to perform, ensure that the challenge is just a little bit higher, then not only are we developing, but we're activating flow, which is helping us develop. And so you get this kind of virtuous kind of upward
I want to take
spiral.
it one step further into the
Yeah.
peak performance aging thing because this is so neat. So yes, absolutely right. That challenge skills balance, and there's questions about like how much above your skill level should the challenge be, and things like that. But one of the things that's really neat, as you sort of move into the second half of our lives with the challenge skill set and all that stuff, is because we're gaining both expertise,
Right.
which is say, not the skill, right? And we gain wisdom, which is like all the emotional intelligence that comes with gaining the skill.
Right.
So it turns out if you want to protect against cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, and all just like the mental half of aging, the two best ways to do it is expertise and wisdom. And it turns out it's because the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's right back here, which is basically where expertise and wisdom both live. That's the most vulnerable to cognitive decline. It's the newest structure in the brain from an evolutionary perspective. It's the most vulnerable. And when you get expertise and wisdom, without getting too technical, they're just huge neural networks. So there's a lot of redundancy across the prefrontal cortex. So not only when you're walking up the challenge skills balance and getting into flow, are you becoming more complex, more adaptive, more mature, all that stuff. You're actually, because you're developing expertise and wisdom, you're protecting the brain against cognitive decline in the future, which I think is really, really cool. It makes, from a biological point of view, it makes sense that wisdom is neuroprotective, right? Isn't the very thing we want to get passed on, and it turns out it actually helps us live longer and pass along more. So it's actually it's a good design.
Yeah.
Whoever did the designing, good design.
Imagine that. Yeah. With NAR country, you talk about, peak performance aging. You've used that term a couple of times, but I love that term. The conventional wisdom is that to age well, keep your brain engaged, do some exercise, eat well, make sure you're getting, all those kind of things. And, you will age well. And what you're saying is something slightly different. Like you don't discount that, but how you engage in those things, right?
Well, I'm not saying anything I mean, in a sense, not saying a whole lot that's all that different, but it turns out the quality of life interventions that you're speaking about, right? We have learned a ton about. Like we know which ones work the best. We know and how they work. And so it's now all those things are true. Let's take exercise, right? Get some exercise is absolutely true. But it turns out if you really want to perform at your best over time, you need to hit all 5 categories of functional fitness: strength, stamina, balance, agility, and flexibility. And it turns out certain things like dynamic motion, right? I always say dynamic motion is key. Dynamic is a word that means all 5 of those categories at once, but it also means like you're using strength and coordination at the same time. When those things happen, you don't not just sort of good for the heart, good for it, those things produce angiogenesis and neurogenesis. So that's the birth of new neurons and the birth of the new blood vessels that get energy to those neurons. So yeah, you can get exercise, right? My parents walk every day. It's better than not walking every day, but they're not protecting bone density. And most your bones are the mineral storehouses for the body. So your brain runs on calcium. Where do you think it comes from, right? So bone density, which you get from lifting heavy weights and doing specific things over time, walking is great, but it's not going to do anything on that front, and it's not going to birth new neurons and those sorts of things. So it's not like the old idea around, how to age gracefully are wrong. It's that we've gotten very specific with it. And even so, and the other thing that I want to mention is So the older idea is that all of our mental skills and our physical skills declined over time. There's nothing we can do to stop it. The new research has revealed that, like, we had it half right. All our skills do decline over time, but all of them are use it or lose it skills, right? So if you never stop training those skills, you can hang on to them, even advance them far later in life. Some of what's changed is on the cognitive side, right? We know all the things that go wrong with the brain over time. We now also know how to fix them, but the interventions are wild, right? Like they're things like we've got video games that work against certain aspects of cognitive to train that up and things like that. So some of it is our training menu has expanded considerably because we've
Right.
gotten more precise based on what you're looking for and what's available. And when I say our training menu, I don't mean the Flow Research Collective. I mean humanity's training
Yes. No, I
menu,
get it.
right? And we've gotten very, very specific. So peak performance aging, in a sentence, everything you like. Then these are all tools for lifelong learning, but you want to regularly engage in challenging, creative, and social activities that demand dynamic, deliberate play and take place in novel outdoor environments.
Mhm.
That's the combination. And if you
I
can
like that,
put
yeah.
that, if you can regularly do that, you're checking all of the boxes. And what's different from that to me is, I mean, it's a lot more precise. And what you don't hear in that is what you hear dominating the aging conversation, the longevity conversation, which is supplements
Right.
and
Right.
biohacking and this and that. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but I'm saying, look, we've got 30 or 40 years of research that shows this stuff is astounding. And we know, like when I say you should engage in challenging, creative, and social activities, we now know robust social networks translate into an extra 7.5 years of healthy longevity. So
Mhm.
like we've really measured it, and that isn't the same for any of the biohacks are brand new. We have no idea what the long-term results are. Some are going to turn out to be great because that's what and a lot are going to turn out to be nonsense. And I'm not saying don't play with those things if you're interested. Of course, play with those things, run the experiments, see what you learn. But like this is what we absolutely know, and it's really well developed, and it's still like as with physical performance, right? Um, the psychological once you retain a certain like baseline of health kind of thing, it's the psychological interventions that have the most potency.
Right. That's interesting. I agree with that. I mean, so as a lifetime, martial arts and yogi kind of guy myself, like some of the healthiest people I've seen who are in their 80s and 90s haven't touched a supplement in their lives, right? And nor do they do any of the other crazy Western hacking stuff. They literally just exercise in a very, very dynamic and functional way every day through yoga, asanas, and being outdoors a lot, like the Blue Zone peeps. And they train their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they train their mind through breath work, through visualization, through concentration training, through
I
service
mean,
and reading,
here's
and
another
all those
one.
things.
So there are 9 known causes of aging, right? Maybe there are more, but the scientists have determined like there's 9 big ones, and like certainly there are billions of dollars and dozens of biotech companies aimed at fixing each and every one of those. But if you don't want to wait, all 9 of them share one. They are all tied to inflammation. Inflammation is tied to stress.
Right.
Anything we do, right? Meditation, all that stuff that
Anything to reduce
combats
stress
stress.
reduces
That those
inflammation.
are those are anti-aging medicines.
Right.
Period. Right. So all that, and I think that's a lot of what you're seeing, and I mean obviously is in the martial arts traditions, for example, you see it in action sports too. I go to the mountain, I ski with so many people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they're killing it.
Yeah.
Like folks,
That's
I can barely, I can barely keep up with, and they've got decades on me.
Right.
And it's, I see it all the time when I go to Squaw Valley, Palisades, Tahoe now. There's always a posses of pros there, and and everybody always chases Tom Day, who's like one of the old like early first extreme skiers. He's I think 65 or 66 now, but like you've got like Olympic downhillers in the pack, and he's leading the charge.
Right.
And you know what I mean? They're like 18-year-old Olympians, and he's 66 years old, and he's the guy in front, and for a reason.
Yeah, totally. that my example of that is the surfing community here in Encinitas, right?
Oh
There's
yeah,
and
you see
also
that
over in Hawaii,
surfing too.
there's some octogenarians who are out there, and they're just crushing it, on their longboard, and they wouldn't miss a day, right? Unless there's a major storm or something like that. It's just that's their flow
Well,
activator, that's their life energy recharger, and they come out with more energy than they go into the water, and it keeps them young. It's incredible.
I will say that the very first peak performance agent conversation I can remember having was with Laird Hamilton
Yeah,
in like
Laird's a great guy. What an interesting guy.
95, 96, 97. And we were talking about his neighbor at the time, who was then in his 60s, who he surfed with, and Billy, who Laird did everything with. Um, and he ended up finally like dying at like 88 or 89, and he was like out there surfing and snowboarding with Laird all the time. But like I remember the conversation with Laird where we were talking about how exactly what you're seeing, how Billy was this guy was one example, but like you'd go into the waves and you were like, I'm seeing 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds kill it out here, kill
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like what you witness in the action sports community, whether it's skiing or surfing or even martial arts, is another example. When you actually go into these communities, you don't see, right? Like you see people killing it much later in life, and it's very different from like whatever the common narrative. This is the first place like where I started to realize that like the common narrative was really wrong, because
Right.
my daily experience in these communities of practice was totally different. I mean, same thing, by the way, when I started doing yoga, which was in the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to my first Ashtanga class, which is what I practiced, and there was a guy in his 80s and a woman in her 80s, and the reason I stuck with it is because I was so pissed that I couldn't do what I was like, are you kidding me? This
I had
lady
that same
is
experience in
77
Ashtanga.
and,
Like,
and I can't do what I was so mad. I'm super competitive. And I was like, no, this is not happening.
Steve, I hate to tell you, but yoga's
It,
about checking the ego at the door.
it
It's
was,
not
I mean,
supposed to be a
it worked
competition.
to my benefit. It's been 30 years. I'm still doing yoga, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's extraordinary. So one of the things that I think people struggle with is that our culture, the Western culture, has largely moved so far away from this idea that challenging yourself physically and mentally is good for you, right? They're literally peddling a completely different message, right? So take the easy route. Here's a pill to make you feel better. Here's a pill to lose weight. Here's a pill to live longer. You don't have to suffer anymore, right? We've kind of moved beyond suffering. And that unfortunately has trapped people in kind of a lower state of being, I think.
Yeah, I mean, first of all,
You got to challenge yourself. You got to challenge your mind. You got to challenge your body every day. You said it earlier. You got to do something hard every day.
every day. I mean, in multiple times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in multiple ways. I was thinking about it this morning. I had an incredibly heavy ski day yesterday, where I skied some of the biggest lines I've ever skied, and I woke up and really tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really tired, and it was time to take the dogs out, and didn't mind taking them out, but didn't want to do the work along the way. But I still I doubled the length of the hike. I was like, okay, fine. If you don't want to go uphill fast and hard today, with a weight vest on, that's fine. But we're going for twice as long. You know what I mean? Like even when I'm trying to reduce the challenge, I reintroduce the challenge back in it. In sort of, Mark, what was so interesting about what you said, and I agree with it so much, is I was like, for some reason, people really want to privilege their emotions. Happy or sad in the moment really seems to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't, if you're a slave to that, that's very, very difficult to overcome from a performance perspective.
Right.
Because you and I were talking about this in the beginning. Everything that is probably worth having, let me frame it differently. I've done this for about a decade now. I've been talking to people about the things in their life that matter the most to them. Like, what have you done that has made the most difference, changed your future in the most beneficial way? And I've been having this conversation for decades. You know what nobody's ever given me an example of, oh, I won the lottery, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
those are
I
not the
inherited
stories
$100 million. It
you
was
hear.
great
I
achievement.
worked 3 jobs and drove a taxi and tended bar to put myself through night school and become a lawyer. What? Those are the stories you hear. Those are my stories. Those are your stories. Those are everybody's stories. You don't hear the, oh, I slipped on a banana peel and met my wife. Like, it doesn't, like, that's not that's not like what it just doesn't, it's not how you hear it. It's not how people tell it. And when you ask people that, right? Like, people who are making these, like, I don't want to suffer, I want to be so comfortable, give me a pill decisions. If you ask them the same question, well, what matters the most to you in your life and what's made the biggest difference? They're going to give you these same examples of things that they struggled with for a long time and finally, triumph. Those are always the stories. And I'm like, you don't even pay. What's amazing to me is people don't even pay attention to the truth of their own history. That's where I sort of get caught by it, because I always just look at the truth of look at your own life for an example. Like, you've been running this experiment yourself for a while. Look at your own life and see, did true happiness ever come from, like, finding a quick way to, like, end suffering and quickly? And there are exceptions, but as a general rule, right? You don't hear it.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, we don't want to give people the impression that they have to go kick their own ass every day, and then, because you could actually then build up resistance. So it's important to do the crawl, walk, run approach, and to choose reasonable challenges every day, and then work that kind of like increasing the requirement for skill and increasing the challenge, and just like incrementally.
The other thing about, you got to
toward more and more challenge.
The caveat, not the caveat, the thing that's worth mentioning here, because I think people screw this up a little bit, is when we talk about the challenge skills balance, right? When you look under the hood of it, there's like 8 to 11 different things that scientists, psychologists mean by challenge and skills.
Right.
And they range from, like, confidence levels to energy levels. So what you have to realize is that we're talking about it as if it was like a steady progression, as if, like, yesterday's challenge, today's challenge, tomorrow. Like, it's a list, and it doesn't work that way, because the challenge every day, your headspace is going to be different, your energy levels are going to be different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, you want to stretch beyond yourself. You want to meet yourself where you are every day and stretch beyond that. It's not as easy to plot on a graph as you'd want it to be. Right? It's like strength gains in the gym. Everybody knows this, right? You'll progress over time, but, like, a great lifting day on Monday does not mean you're going to have the same kind of, you know what I mean? Like, I may set a new bench on Monday. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to do it again on Wednesday or Friday, right? And it changes, and you have to be flexible with that, and just know that, like, you just want to push yourself a little bit. And the other side of it is also, the other one is that I see a lot, especially if you're dealing with, like, entrepreneurs and like real go-getters, is they take on challenges that are so great that it's too big for what you're supposed to do in the day, right? And too big, now you're overwhelmed. That's right. And you think you're doing it because it's going to grab your attention and keep you engaged, and it may, over the long haul, but on a day-to-day basis, it's actually kicking you in the ass, and it's too great, and it's demotivating, and it's taking you in the other. So it's really, you know what I mean? You have to you have to be humble with it. I always, like, with skiing, I have a motto, especially around peak performance aging, it's 1 inch at a time. Yeah. And I literally mean an inch. And like, so at the end of the day, when I, like, or writing, same way, when I look back and I review my progress, there's a part of my brain that's going to be disappointed. Well, maybe there are great days where I won't be disappointed. There's a part of my brain that's always just, it wants more progress, more progress, more progress. But then I have to reframe and be like, well, did you actually go your inch? Right. Oh, you actually went a couple of inches, didn't you? You wanted to go 3 yards, so you're pissed off, but you actually went like 3 inches, and that was, you went farther than you set out to, and that was the point. So some of it is you have to, like, I have to manage it that way too, I think. That's great. I know humans, I don't know if this is just hardwired in the brain or it's a cultural thing, but we tend to over magnify the failures or the lack of accomplishments or, things that don't go well. And we underemphasize the accomplishments and the things that do go well.
And so I think it's important to flip that, right? To flip that, right? To things that don't go well, like in the SEALs, we said, okay, well, whatever. We just learned how not to do it. Let's go ahead and figure out how another way. And so that de-emphasized the failures. And then when we won, we were like, man, even if it was a small win, we're like, good job. You know, we learned to celebrate those wins. And that was a big part of our success, especially the de-emphasizing the failure, because a lot of people lock on those failures that things don't go well. And then they magnify and they blow it out of proportion and they take it personally as if they are the failure.
Yeah, I think shame, self-consciousness, embarrassment, self-criticism.
Yeah, those are the killers of performance.
They're the killers of performance. They absolutely are. There's no, and in fact, so here's something wild in peak performance aging. We've been talking about the challenge, skills, balance. One of the things that we figured out at the Flow Research Collective for peak performance aging is that I'm going to use the term older adults. And all I mean by that is you're an older adult once the voice in your head starts saying, hey, you're too old for this shit. That's like the minute you could be in your 20s. If
that's
you've got
a killer right there.
That voice, right? That's what I'm putting you in that category. Okay. Yeah. So once you're in that category, so people have been trying to measure the challenge, skills, balance, the separation for a while. Chick Sent Me High tried, and he came up with about 4%. It wasn't a real attempt. We tried to validate that. It's difficult, but that's a rough estimate. What we figured out in older adults is because of allostatic load, which is the impact of stress over time, because of injuries and the fact that this internal governor will keep you hampered for about 18 months after an injury, all that stuff, we realized it shrunk. And in older adults, it can be as small as like 1% for certain kinds of skill acquisition. So literally most of our success in running experiments with peak performance aging was like go slow to go fast. We had to hold people back.
Love that.
Because of but the point there is when you've got like a really thin margin, like a 1% difference between challenge and skills, if you've got shame, self-consciousness, like you've just eaten up that whole 1%, right? You like now you've got an actual performance problem. And I always say that one of the secrets, I think, to peak performance in general, but especially as peak performance aging, figure out how you like to learn and don't waver. Like I'm introverted. I want to be bad in private. I don't want to learn in public. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I like to learn. I like to warm up slowly, whether this is as a writer or as an athlete. Like there's certain things that get the best performance out of me over time. I don't waver on them anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Like this is exactly how I learn best. And so that's what I'm going to aim for every time. And, you know, some of it is that, you know, the voice in my head is loud. Shame is heavy for me sometimes. And I don't want public failures. It's, you know, but I'm getting better and better and better at like being really bad in public at things. But I'm 55 years old. It took me a long time to get there.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. It reminds me of our saying in the team, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And that's, you know, that's how we approach learning. That's how we approach our ops, you know, so let's just be methodical. Let's work the processes. Let's not get ahead of our skis. And then suddenly, you know, as you continue to move through your practice or your work up toward deployment, or even in an individual op, this works. You find that you're actually executing at what would be perceived as a very fast level, but in your mind, it's still slow and methodical. Because that slow is smooth, smooth is fast is kind of activating that group flow process, and everything seems to be within the time domain within your control. But if you try to speed things up, if you rush things, if you don't do the warm up, if you get all like, oh, I got to get into this mentally, then you don't activate flow, right? You prevent flow, you block it in some way.
And you know, it's interesting with skiing, for example. It takes 20 minutes, 4 runs or so for most human bodies to be warmed up. That's just how long it takes the human body to warm up. And I watch so many people, like, it's the first run and they want to go to the hardest
That's
They
right.
want
Yeah.
to, because they want to
They
get
want
it
to go
out
from
of the
zero to
way, or
hero.
they want to
Right.
start out charging or whatever. And I'm like, you do realize that like your body can't perform, and it's like it's not warmed up. Like it doesn't matter what you're trying to do, it's not warmed up, and you're actually just going to hurt your performance later.
Right.
It's we say ours was you got to go slow to go fast, but
That's right.
it's
Yeah.
really it's very much true. The same thing is true with writing. Like I always start my day by editing what I wrote the day before. I know
Mhm.
I got to face a blank page. I know I've got to I have to produce this many new words every day. But that gets my brain into the rhythm of playing with language, and it fires up because my pattern recognition skills working a little bit. Like
Right.
it ends up saving me my time later. But it's like I could do like sometimes like it feels like a writing wise like a 2 hour, 3 hour warm up for like 20 minutes of
Right.
actual
Right.
writing. It's
Right.
a 4 hour writing session, right? But
Right.
like the warm up took 3 hours, and then when I was ready to hit the blank page, I could just fill it.
Right.
And but it and you, over time, you start to recognize your rhythms. It's hard to learn it at the front end,
Mhm.
right? That's the advantage of consistency is you start to figure this out over time. And you're like, oh, wow, if I go slow first, I
Mhm.
get to go fast later. Oh, okay, that's consistent across. I've
Mhm.
seen this again and again. So you stop making those mistakes.
Right. And we got to wrap up here. I want to be sensitive to our time, but I'm intrigued with one aspect of your training, and I'll preface it by saying that I acquired a company called Brute Force Training at the end of last year, and we make weight vests and weighted backpacks for training, like rucksacks, and we make weighted kettlebells, not like metal, but with this combination of rubber mulch and shot, right? So it's really cool, innovative. So, but training with a weight vest is really powerful, and it's just still pretty fringy. But a lot more people are
I mean,
starting.
it's at the heart of what I did in our country. It's how I train. We're like,
Right.
and
And
the reason,
I want to hear like how
yeah.
it's
So it's
beneficial. Yeah, for you.
the quick and dirty version is twofold. At the Flow Research Collective, we train people in 130 countries, but the one commonality among all of them is they're all busy, right?
Yeah.
So we always look for what I call multi-tool solutions, a single tool that solves multiple problems at once. And when it came to training, so if I started with a weight vest, it was really simple. Like I didn't have time. I was trying to train for this crazy experiment in peak performance aging, and I knew I needed a lot to train. I didn't have time for more training. I was already like I went to the gym a bunch of times. I did what I did, but part of what I was doing on a daily basis was hiking my dogs. I've got dogs. I have to take them out every day. And I was like, oh, wow, I can add in a weight vest.
Right.
And so that was where it started with me is how do I get more training in less time?
Right.
Right. But what I started to realize with the weight vest is for peak performance aging, it's one-stop shopping. You get balance, agility, strength, and stamina. And if you're stretching before and after, like you should be,
Mhm.
that's almost all the categories. And if you're going uphill faster and coming downhill faster, especially like fast twitch dynamic motion, that's great. Additionally, there's work done that shows weight vests and training with a weight vest is one of the best ways to protect bone density
Right.
over time. And it increases bone density, which you have to do for peak performance aging. Also, as you pointed out, like a part of the formula, peak performance aging demands you have novel outdoor experiences because the brain, you want to preserve the brain, and the brain, most of the neurogenesis in the brain, new neurons, are born in the hippocampus. Hippocampus is the part of the brain that does long-term memory, and it also does location. It evolved. When you have emotionally charged experiences in the outdoors, that's what this hip part of the brain evolved to do.
Right.
So the best way to preserve the brain is to have emotionally charged experiences in novel outdoor environments because it produces the most neurons and it backs up the neural networks, and you get everything you want. So with a weight vest, you're getting all of this. And you've seen some of this literature too. The single most important on the physical side for peak performance aging, the single most important thing you can do over time is leg strength. Leg strength inversely correlates with mortality, right? And there's a bunch of different reasons for it. Some of it has to do with that our leg bones are the biggest bones in our body, so we're increasing bone health there. Some of it has to do with as long as you have leg strength, balance doesn't go, you don't succumb to falls, and on and on and on. But a weight vest was this sort of the single best way to do it. The only caveat is, I always say that, like, start any movement training by going to see a movement professional who can watch you walk and figure out, like, what you broke your ankle when you were 16 and you overcompensate this way, and, like, fix your body first before you start adding a bunch of new load.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, you're just going to injure yourself, and you're going to go in the other direction. And I always say with the weight vest, like, start slowly. If you think you can hike a 20-minute hill with your weight vest, start by hiking 20 minutes on flat ground. Then try, like, very slowly. And what I liked with the weight vest, so this is the last thing I'm going to mention, because this is, I could use, so your mind can't wander if there's any level of exertion, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so if you're really exerting yourself, you're focused on what you're doing. So I found that I could hike with a weight vest and use, when I could do like a 90-minute hike at a certain weight, right? With my mind wandering throughout, I was like, okay, you've mastered that level. Go heavier or go faster. Right. So I could use, like, what my brain was doing as a measure of, like, exertion levels as a really great feedback mechanism with the weight vest. And I was like, it's a phenomenal tool across the boards. I'm a big fan of them for training. And in fact, during ski season, I've started to, even on my off days, I wear like a 12-pound weight vest. Mm-hmm. Just so I'm, getting a little something on my hikes, even if it's my rest day, because I'm trying to raise the, like, baseline level of my rest days a little higher too. So I've been playing with that a lot this year.
Yeah, I made a comment the other day to a friend of mine. I said, if we could issue weight vests to kids in school, we'd solve a lot of problems, right? You suddenly seeing kids dropping weight and getting much healthier and being more athletic and being more focused just by giving them a weight vest and say, here.
Well, it's to me, it's the ultimate in, like, passive exertion.
Right.
So it's perceived exertion in a weight vest is, you notice it for the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got this heavy. And then
it's like an article of clothing.
Then it goes away. Right. And then you don't even notice it. And so, like, we know this from other studies on weight vests. Perceived exertion versus real exertion. Perceived exertion while you're wearing a weight vest is actually usually 5 to 10% under the actual work you're doing. You think you're doing less work than you're actually doing, which are you kidding? Like, for America, where they want everything in a pill and you want everything easy, this is the only thing that is legitimately easy. Right. Like, it's actually wild. So yeah, I'm a really big fan of them. And
so if you're listening, get yourself a weight vest at bruteforcetraining.com and start wearing it at work. I showed up at meetings with a weight vest on, and now my team
is in our country, it's got a ton of stuff on it. I break it down a lot. I'm a big fan. That's awesome. I think there was the longest chapter in the book is the one that breaks down, like, the weight vest and the weight vest hiking and the, like,
is that right? That's great.
Because I was just so fascinated by what an amazing tool.
Right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Stephen. So NAR Country, where do you want people to go to kind of learn more about the book? And
the book's available anywhere. narcountry.com, GNAR country.com is the website for the book. The cool thing on the website, we ran a bunch of really crazy peak performance aging experiments, and we had National Geographic cameramen follow us around the whole time. So, like, you don't even take my word for any of it. You can go watch videos and check that out too. So
that's awesome.
narcountry.com, but the book's available anywhere. And, if you're actually going to listen to what I have to say, support local independent bookstores if you can. They need you.
That's right. Stephen, thanks so much for your time today. I look forward to seeing you on the slopes with our weight vests on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Booyah.
Be well.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.